In this video, we're going to look at how the indicator over here on the left-hand side of the watch was created. The dots that you see, the dial, and also the text. We're also going to talk about how we create the hard shadow that we see falling onto the main base from different elements of the watch. Now, of course, we left off the last video where we modeled the base, and that's what's in this action node right here. But let's go back out to the schematic and let's create some elements in a new action. And then little by little, we'll combine the different elements as we make them. I just find it a little easier or less confusing to build the different elements on individual actions, and then you can copy what you've done in one action into another and continue to compile them all together. So with the new action selected, the empty one, let's go into it. I'll hit the tilde key to go into its schematic. And actually what we want to be doing right now is looking at the end result. So I'll hit the F4 key. Let's go over to the right-hand side of the UI and click on the grid option to expose our grid options. Switch our grid option from none to row and column grid. Then go to the center option and switch it from none to large center. The grid option by default is 64 by 36, and that's fine, leave that alone. Turn off our grid option, and from our action node bin, let's bring in a 3D shape. And now we have the grids and our center line to use as a guideline for what we're going to create. And now I'll draw a shape using these 4 grids right here as a reference to where to put my vertices. Then holding the control key, I'll region select all 4 vertices. I'll hit the B key to access the break tool. Then click on one of the vertices to break all of them at once. Now we can zoom in really tight on the shape that we just created and go to the lower left corner of our view and click where it reads Live Preview to go into 3D view. This will allow us to adjust and control our vertices much more precisely. And then we can region select just this lower left vertice. For the GMass, go to the vertice parameters. And now we can use the X and the Y parameters to fine-tune exactly where we want this vertice to be. And then I'll go through each vertice and make sure I have it to be a perfect square. Now, just for reference, let me go back to the end result of the watch and bring that up in the viewer and point out these little squares you see right here that are part of our dial. This is what we're trying to create right now. All right, so let's go back to our action with our new shape we just created. Make sure we have the top axis, the main axis selected for our 3D shape. Go back to the end result. Turn off proportional for our scale parameters. Then we'll scale down the X parameter to 3. And then for the Y parameter, we're going to scale this down to 8. That's a little small. Let's go 10. Set the Y parameter to 10. I'll hold the control key and click in the percentage size for the viewport to zoom back out. Then go back to our schematic view. We want to use a replica node. So I'll drag the replica node into our schematic and then drag and connect it as the parent to the main axis for our shape. Then make sure you have the axis above our 3D shape selected now. We'll go to the object parameters and once again hit F4 to look at our end result. And then we want to raise this up on our Y parameter so we can start to use the slider or just enter 200 for an exact amount. Hit the tilde key to go back to our schematic and select the replica node. And then for the number, we can enter 10. And then with the replica still selected, we'll hit the F4 key to return back to the end result. And then we want to adjust the Z rotation. And you can see that we're creating replicas of our little shape. And in the end, enter 30 for the Z rotation. Hit the I key to show just the icon for the selected node, which would be the replica tool. Now we have 10 small little indicators created from one shape because of the replica tool. And the angle between them is 30 degrees because that's the value we put in the rotation. Now we want to add the hand indicator and have it centered in between all of these. So let's go back to our schematic view. We want to drag in another 3D shape into the scene. Once again, we can delete the axis and the original GMask shape, select the 3D shape that was added, go back down to our node bin, and let's drag in a GMask ellipse, which then is connected to our 3D shape. Hit F4 to go back to our result. Hold the Alt and the Shift key once again and click and drag to create our shape. So now it's centered between our little indicators, and now we want to connect them together. Let's drag out another axis into the scene and connect it as the parent to both of these shapes. Make sure you connect the axis to the replica and then also the axis of the new shape. With this new axis selected, let's go back to our end result, hit the F4 key. And now if we rotate that new axis, you can see what we've done. We've got our little indicators, 10 of them spaced out, and we have an elliptical GMask 3D shape in the center of them. Now back in our schematic view, make sure you select the 3D elliptical shape, and then we want to extrude this. Give it a value of about 20, and then below the value, choose front from the flyout so that we're extruding from the front creation of the shape. Let's go back to our node preferences to enable shading again. So turn shading on and set the value to 100. Now we want to start creating the hands that will extend out of both sides of this round shape that we just created. Let's turn off our node preferences, and we want to select the top axis for everything. And let's reset our X rotation back to 0. So we're looking straight onto our objects once again. Back in our schematic view with the main axis selected, drag another 3D shape out into our schematic and it will be connected to the main axis. Go back to the result view and let's zoom in really close on our circle shape we created. We're automatically in draw shape mode, so let's just click and create a freeform shape, something like this. This is going to be part of the extending hand of our dial. After you finish creating the shape, region select them with the control key, and then get the B key to get our break tool, and then once again break all the tangents. Now we can spend a little time going vertex to vertex and adjusting them as needed. Zoom in if you need to really see what we're doing here. If you accidentally deselected the GMask, go back to the schematic and make sure you've got the right one selected. And then again, just start selecting each vertex one at a time and adjusting them. If you're having problems adjusting them in the viewport, then go down to the translation parameters and adjust the X and Y as needed. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, so I'll region select all these bottom vertices. And then using the Y translation for these vertices, I'll just adjust this to make it a little smaller. Now we want to add a tail or a top part of the dial. So let's go back to our schematic once again. Drag out an additional 3D shape. And since I didn't have the main axis selected, I will manually create the connection by clicking and dragging off at the axis onto the new axis for this 3D shape to create our parent-child relationship. Then I'm going to hit the D key to get my delete tool, and I'm going to delete the bottom axis and the bottom GMask. Select the 3D shape icon once again. Then I'll drag a GMask rectangle into the scene, go back to the end result, and in the view, I'm just going to click and drag to create a new shape. Zoom in to see what we're doing. Then I can region select the top and the bottom vertices and use the translation settings to adjust it to the way I like it, something like this. And then we can go back and select the original part of this dial that we created and make adjustments to its vertices so they line up exactly as we want. Now we want to extrude those two shapes, but to see it in the view, let's go back to our schematic. Let's select the top axis, go back to the end result, and let's adjust our X rotation just a little bit so we can see what's going to happen in the viewport as we make the adjustments. I'll select the GMask in the viewport of our bottom triangular shape, and then from the basic menu, let's extrude this shape. We'll adjust the depth to about 8. Well, maybe that's a little too much. Maybe go down to 7. Once again, we're going to select from the front. Next, we select our tail shape, and for the extrude, I'll set the value to 8 and switch it to front. Oh wait, I think we set the front one to 7. We did, so let me go back and let's set both of them for the extrude amount, the depth, to be 7. Now we've got our 3 different elements that will make up this dial. I'll hit the I key to switch the icons to just selected. Now we can go to our grid setting and let's set our grid and our center back to none. We don't need them anymore, so let's turn them off. I can zoom out a little bit, and again, if we go back and select our main axis, we can rotate a little bit around, and we can see we've created our main indicators and the dials. Okay, now we want to start fine-tuning the shape, such as the center part of our dial there. I want to bevel the edges of that. So I'll hit the I key until I see all of my icons once again, and I'll select the GMass that's creating this shape that we have here, the circle in the middle. And then we go back to our schematic view with the tilde key. Make sure the 3D shape is what is highlighted and selected, which it is. And then I'll go to the profile options. Let's hit F4 once again to go back to the end result so we can see it happening as we make the adjustments. Once again, I'll hit the I key to go back to just selected for our icons. And coming down to the parameters, I'll adjust the curvature to 1, and then we'll start adjusting our angle. You can see it updating in the viewport and also in the graph next to the parameters. And we can enter an exact value of 17. Now I'll hit I twice to show all icons once again. And then I'll select the long extended part of our dial. Once again, we'll adjust our curvature to 1 and then start to adjust the angle. Let's put a value of 18 for this angle bevel. Select the shape in the back. Once again, the curvature goes to 1, the maximum. And then we'll set the angle for this shape to 18 also. So now we've adjusted the bevel profile for all 3 shapes. Turn off the icons once again by hitting the I key twice so we can clearly see what we just did. So now we're done with the modeling part of these shapes. So let's copy what we did in this action and paste it into the action we created earlier for the base of the watch. Make sure we select all the nodes for what we've just created. You do that by holding the Alt key down and clicking on the top axis. That selects everything that is a child to this axis. Hit Control C to copy it. Hit the Escape key to go back out to our batch schematic. Select the original action tool with the base in it and hit the tilde key to step into that action schematic. Once you're in that schematic, hit Control V to paste the dial we just created. Now, if you hit F4 right now, we go to look at the end result, you can see that we brought in the dial and the elements that we just created, but they're not positioned properly. So go back to our schematic view once again. Make sure you select just the top axis that is affecting all of these nodes. Come down to the bottom of the UI on the right-hand side and click the Reset button to undo or reset all the values for that axis. Then we want to take our main control axis of the base that we created earlier, we drag off of that, and we create the parent-to-child relationship with this axis that we just reset. Select the axis for this new group of nodes we just brought in. Go back to the end result view. Go to the object parameters for this axis, and then we want to adjust the Z position for this. But I think we can adjust this to a value of 12 for the Z position. Now we might want to scale this a little bit. Proportional's on, and I'll bring this to about 77. Now I think we need to adjust our Z once again, so let's bring that to 16. Then using our X position slider, let's move it over on the left-hand side, maybe around 225, 227, and then we can make an adjustment to our scale once again. Maybe bring it down a little bit more, 73. Make the adjustments until you feel happy with its position relative to the base that we have modeled in our first lesson. Now I'm happy with the indicator and the dial where it's located, but we want to have further control over this, especially the dial. That geometry, the dial, is made up of these three pieces of geometry we have here on the right-hand side, and drag another axis out into the schematic. And then while holding the Shift key, I will kiss each one of those axes, the top axis for those, and now I've created a master axis for all three of them. I'm going to click and drag across the connection to those axes to break it, and then I'll drag off this main axis, the original main axis, from these geometries and feed that as a parent to our new axis we just created. This now gives us a control axis for our dial. So with that axis selected, the new one we just created, let's go back to our end result view, go to our object parameters. This gives us independent control of this piece of geometry compared to our indicators that we created. And now if we make a rotation to this on the Z parameter, we can animate and keyframe this to adjust as time goes by. Now let's assign a material to our dial. Go back to our schematic, and then with that 3D shape selected, we go down to our node bin for action. We hit the S key once again, and then I'll drag a substance PBR into the schematic, which brings up our substance PBR dialog box. I'll go to the metal subfolder, subdirectory. I'm going to choose the metal steel, which then automatically applies this substance PBR to our 3D geometry that was selected. I'll hit F4 to go to our end result. I'll hit I twice to turn off icons for everything. Now we can see that that center part, our circle shape, has a black metal steel look to it. Let's add an IBL light to the scene to further enhance the look of this. So we'll go back to our schematic. We'll select our camera, then hit I, and we'll access our IBL. Drag that into the scene with the camera selected. Then hit F4 once again, and we can see the effect already happening on our geometry. Now let's change the actual texture that's being used for this IBL. So let's go to its parameters, go to Object, go to Read File, click the Load button. Let's switch to proxies so we can see a thumbnail or proxy of our different options here. And then we'll select the Empty Lab EXR file. And then click the Load button to load that. Now we can see it has a different effect, a different light. Now I want to show how we created the dramatic shadow. So let's go back to the end result once again, just to take a quick look at it. So you can see here the dramatic shadow that's being cast. So let's go back to our action schematic. Make sure you have the light selected in the schematic. This is the light we created in the first video, if you remember. I'll hit F4 once again to see the end result. And we're going to make some adjustments to the positioning and the intensity of the light. For the Z value for the position, we'll enter 1200, and then we'll set our Y value to 0. And then the X position, let's set that to 3000. Wait, I entered 300, not 3000 for the X position, so make sure you set your X position to 3000 as I said. And then we'll adjust the intensity of the light. Let's enter 1600. And because we just made the adjustments to the light's position, that obviously will affect the shadows and how drastic the shadows are cast based on where the light's position is and its intensity. You'll see that as we make an adjustment to the Y position for the light, it will change the length of the shadow that is being cast by the geometry that we've created. So depending upon the shadow effect you want, you can adjust your Y value into a negative position, which gives you a much longer shadow, or a positive value will give you a shorter shadow. And then you can adjust the intensity of your light to further control the shadow effect. And then depending upon the geometry and the scene you're working on, and if it's movement or animation happening, you can see the effect of the shadows when things are moving by selecting the main axis and adjusting everything. We can see how the shadows are changing. Now we want to add a little text in here just above the dial. So let's go back to our schematic once again. In our node bin, we'll hit the 3 key. We'll drag a 3D text into our schematic. And then with that 3D text selected, let's go to the object parameters. In the text field, we'll change what it reads. We'll enter something like multiply 1000, hit the enter or return, and then we'll connect it to the main axis. So the main axis is a parent of this also. Then I'll select the axis for the 3D text itself. Go back to our end result. If I hit the I key, we show all of our icons again. We can see our text is right there in the very center. I'll hit the I key twice again to hide all the icons. And then using the Z position value, I can start to adjust that so that it raises up till it reaches the top of the bottom of our base. And then we can scale it down a little bit. And then we can go and adjust our X and our Y position so that it is located at the top of our dial and our indicators. Go back to our schematic and select our main axis for everything. Go back to the result view, and as we make an adjustment and we rotate, you can see that our text is now part of our base. We can go back and select the axis for our text. We might want to rotate this a little bit, make it fit in there a little better. So that's how we can create this left side, the dial, the different indicators, and the text, and incorporate it with the base that we created in our first lesson. That's going to be it for this lesson.